Good morning. I am going to do a quick raise of the hand that everyone can hear me. So if you can hear me okay, if you can raise your hand. Okay, great. Thank you so much. It looks like I'm coming through clearly. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. For those of you who have not had a chance to meet me, my name is Cheryl Kosmatka. I took over the position of McKinney-Vento State Coordinator last September. I had been in federal programs for over 5 years, so the McKinney-Vento Act was not new to me, but I have certainly learned a lot in the past year. Just a quick note, if we can wait to the end of the presentation to answer, we'll do some question and answer time. I do have Teresa Vilmer here with me this morning to look at those questions in the chat, and but I would like to wait to the end of the presentation, and I'll take a peek at those, and we can. I'm hoping to have plenty of time for question and answers. Okay, today we're going to talk about supporting students experiencing homelessness during school reopening. I know that every district in Missouri has started school in some capacity, but I continue to hear from LEAs facing challenges every day about the reopening of school since our COVID pandemic last spring. So hopefully we will address some of those challenges. Okay, the agenda today, we're going to talk about challenges and strategies for the identification, outreach and communication, access to learning, which would be distance learning, unaccompanied homeless youth, transportation, infants, toddlers, and preschools, health, safety, and basic needs. First and foremost, I think it's important to note that with the current pandemic, there are no waivers in terms of the implementation of the McKinney-Vento Act. What that means is that more than ever, we will want to be following all the guidelines and laws of the McKinney-Vento Act when it comes to serving our homeless student and youth. It also pertains to the Title I Part A reservation and funds for homeless students. I am hearing more often than not, because of the amount of homeless students that we're seeing already this year, that districts are struggling with ways to accommodate their needs. So I think it's important that you talk to your Title I staff and be at the table when you're discussing that reservation for your Title I funds. Also, the requirements to serve children and youth with disabilities who are homeless, none of those laws have changed. Independent student status for unaccompanied youth on the FAFSA. We're still counting on our counselors to be reaching out to our juniors and seniors to communicate higher education goals and making them aware of their independent status on the FAFSA form. Another important key consideration when we're thinking about reopening our schools is that every local educational agency, LEA, must have a liaison currently in place with adequate capacity to identify McKinney-Vento students and ensure their enrollment, full participation, and equitable access to services. As I had mentioned already, and I'm sure you'll hear it numerous times during the presentation, we are anticipating more families experiencing homelessness So it is more important than ever that liaisons have the capacity to identify McKinney-Vento students. Having a point of contact in each building is a great way to help with the identification of homeless students. And we'll talk more about this in later slides, but training that staff to know the process for identifying those homeless students and families is imperative. Okay, we're going to start looking at some of the challenges in identification. We are anticipating an increased number of homelessness, identifying families and youth who became homeless after the close of school last spring. Identification challenges locating families and youth that were homeless last year, but we've not heard from yet this year. I know that there's been a lot of movement from some of those families that were identified as homeless last year, and contact information is not available. Again, understanding the definition and nature of homelessness, that brings you back to our homeless liaisons that we rely on tremendously to help our staff, which means our all full personnel, staff being bus drivers, cooks, secretaries, janitors, anyone that would come in contact with our students that would help in the identification of our homeless families and youth. And then also identification challenges of removing barriers. Like I said, I'm hearing more and more from LEAs that they're facing problems locating their families, and really enough that the numbers are very concerning. So this identifying homeless children and youth needs to be a priority. Okay, sorry about that. I had a little glitch in technology. Okay, so let's look at some strategies to help in the process of identifying those homeless student and youth. You must have a system in place to identify returning McKinney-Vento students as well as students who are newly experiencing homelessness. It's important that you have embedded questions and information about homelessness in all school enrollment documents and outreach efforts, including food pickup or delivery, emails, or other communication to all parents and students. And this is very important. You need to ensure that your online enrollment system, they are accessible and understandable. I'll say that again, that they need to be understandable to parents and youth experiencing homelessness. Online systems must provide a way for parents and students to enroll without typical required documents, and an internal mechanism to refer potential homeless students to the liaison. That's a really, really important point here, because I know that most districts have been forced, if they weren't doing online enrollment already, to go to that means, but we have to think about our homeless students and families, and really what the capability that they have to be able to enroll those students online. Okay, and again, like I said, you're going to hear this often, is ensure that you're training your staff. They're available to connect with McKinney-Vento families before school begins. And that would be, looking back at who your homeless students and families were last year. when school closed down last March, you need to, you should have had that list out and had been trying to make contacts with those families. Even if until the end of last year, if you were, lost connection with some of them, it's important that you do all you can to make a connection. And then again, ensuring that McKinney-Vento students have equitable access to all school activities, whether online or in person. They should have equitable services as our house students do. Also, you want to be prepared to address barriers to enrollment and retention in school, including that you ensure access to COVID-related supplies, such as personal protective equipment, hygiene supplies, clothing, and laundry. And as far as assuring that they have equitable services, we know that our homeless students and families, the more they engage in school, the better the chance that they remain in school. And that is McKinney-Vento's Act is one of their high priorities. We want to keep our kiddos in school, and if they are aware of the services that are available, they feel more engaged and therefore remain in school. Okay, then we look at some challenges that you may be experiencing in our outreach and communication challenges. We know that there's an increased mobility of McKinney-Vento families and students. So it's important that you're maintaining contact with your McKinney-Vento students, including unaccompanied youth. And again, understanding the definition and nature of homelessness. And I know I'm repeating myself, but I think they're important points. It's important that you make contact with those students that were homeless when schools were closed back in the spring, in addition to those families that may be experiencing homelessness currently. All right, some strategies to help with some of those outreach and communications is coordinate district responses and resources, identify and target funding. I'm not going to talk a lot about funding, but I mentioned earlier your Title I set aside. I think it's really important more than ever that our homeless liaisons are really at the table with our Title I staff, and I know that you may be that same person, having those conversations about what is available and maybe looking at the amount of funds that might need to be set aside. Okay, for outreach, we want to try everything. We want to email, phone, texting, regular mail, Facebook. We have so many different media outlets that we can hopefully reach our students. And it may even mean doing home visits. In your older students, you may, ask around and ask your students, have they been in contact with a family or with an unaccompanied homeless youth? Have those conversations. And once you connect with a parent or youth, stay in touch on a regular basis. Make sure that you have maybe a couple of contact sources or email addresses, and in case that one of them is not working, or you've lost contact with that particular number or email address. To think about creative ways to reach and keep in touch with homeless students. And actually, as I'm saying that, creative ways, I also would like to hear, and we can talk about at the end of the presentation, I'd love to hear from districts that are doing things that are working creative ways to especially stay in communication and locate those families and youth that were unable to contact. Okay, access to learning challenges. We know that every district or most districts have had some issues. I mean, this is new to everybody. It was definitely uncharted waters when we were thrown into this situation last spring. So when we're talking about virtual learning, and this is for our housed students, but even can be more so for our homeless children and youth, is lack of internet, devices, electricity, lack, and especially for our homeless kiddos, lack of safe, stable environment that's conducive to learning, lack of transportation to reach internet spots or pickup devices, and transportation to in-person school. We'll talk about some strategies, but we have to think about when we say lack of internet and devices. I mean, when you have a family, it's 3 or 4 students in one family, one device is not going to be conducive to learning. So you need to be thinking about what every person in the family needs to get the same education and equitable services that our home family students and families receive. Okay, so some of the strategies is, we encourage our LEAs to pay for unlimited data. When I say insurance on devices, I've had some concerns that devices are not getting returned and or they're not being reimbursed if those devices get lost or stolen, or so we don't want that to be a barrier for our homeless students. So we want to make sure that they have the same capability as our house students. You'll want to provide sufficient data and devices for every student in the family. I mentioned that. Like I said, it's impossible for a family of 3 or 4 to have one computer. You have to think about what the individual needs are for that family. And using learning models that respond to housing realities. Okay, when I say that, a lot of our families are in shelters, in their cars. We have to really think about where their learning is happening. Where is that taking place? So you may have to consider things like, a shorter chunk of time that they would be able to be on virtually. Maybe the assignments, what's real, what is reality for them that they can be successful and complete. And as far as credits, looking back at what do they really have to graduate, looking at those important pieces of credits and assignments and different things that will make them successful. Provide one-on-one academic support, and like I said, I know that you're doing this for all of your students, so our homeless students are no different. Prioritize McKinney-Vento students for safe on-site options and for transportation. And when I say that, and we'll I think talk a little bit more too, is that if there is an option for our homeless families and unaccompanied youth to learn on site, I would do everything you can to encourage that. We really want our eyes on those families and kiddos. We want to see that that they are engaged and that we know where they are. So if that's an option, that they that they come on site, even if it's a hybrid model, not every day. We really want to make that a priority for our McKinney-Vento students. just so, like I said, we've got our eyes and we see that they are participating and engaging in their learning. Okay. Okay, then it brings us in, I include unaccompanied homeless youth um, in our conversation about homeless families in general, but some of their challenges is they feel isolated, lack of basic needs, struggling to engage with distance learning, lack of mentorship, guidance, and academic support. And then again, that FAFSA determinations, having that guidance from their counselors of what all of that looks like moving forward with their career plans. We think back in the spring where we would have had a lot of our unaccompanied homeless youth that were doing some couch surfing. They were doubled up, and while even in situations, that's not always an ideal situation, but when we were all thrown into this, uncharted waters and we were asked to remain at home, that became even a bigger challenge for our unaccompanied homeless youth. There may have been families that were willing to let those students stay knowing that they wouldn't be at the home for as many hours as we all were and continue to be. So again, they're isolated, they may lack basic needs, they don't have the guidance and support of of a parent or guardian. So we'll talk some about the strategies. So we want to make sure that we provide our youth with technology to keep in touch. So more so than not with our unaccompanied homeless youth, we want to make sure that we're finding them. We're finding those kiddos and that we're giving them the technology that they need so that we don't lose them. We want to check in with them at least weekly. And then more than ever, we really need to have the support of other allies, our teachers, our counselors, our nurses, social workers, transportation people, our shelter people. That's when we talk about our community partners. Even our churches, we need to be having conversations with just as many people as we can to make sure that we are connecting with those unaccompanied homeless youth. We would want to seek the support of our community partners for basic needs. This has actually been my guidance for some of those districts that in the past have not had the need to set aside very many funds in their Title I set aside because they've just not had the need, have not really had the homeless population. But I'm hearing more and more that that's not the case starting this school year. So they're asking, well, where do I come up with this money? And I say to them, this is when, we talk about having those community partners more so than ever. Now, it is very, very important that you're reaching out to your community, even in rural areas. You have to be, again, creative. Your banks, your civic, community, your organizations. You would be surprised how many of these partners would be glad to help support you if they understand your need. And again, to work with your seniors on college transition, their career plans, helping them understand what it looks like, what their options really are as far as continuing education. All right, now we'll talk a little bit about transportation challenges. We want to, what I am hearing also is that some of those contracted services that were used in the past, they may not either they may not want to transport their students this year. They may, just because of the COVID, social distancing, fear of that, or they are no longer in service. When schools closed last spring, that was a loss of income for them, and some of them have not been able to bounce back from that. So besides not wanting to transport students, they may no longer be in service. We want their transportation options for students who if a student gets sick during the middle of the day, how would they get home? Social distancing on buses. And I know you're having that with all of your students. And then ensuring options are available for before and after school care time and participation in extracurricular activities. You may, I didn't mention, having the challenges of getting those homeless families and unaccompanied homeless youth the things that they need. Again, devices, food. Okay, and strategies for some of those transportation challenges. If, for example, as a district, you're having your challenges with all students, and I've had the question come up a couple of times is, we can't get that student to their school of origin because our transportation is already strapped. We've already got so many challenges meeting our needs of getting the kiddos to their resident school. We just really can't get them to their school of origin. Well, it's really not an option. So when you've had that best interest determination, and the school of origin is what we encourage, what McKinney-Vento Act encourages. If that is what is determined to be in the best interest of the student, then transportation is required. So you may have to be creative. Again, look at different transportation methods. And this is not new. This is not new. We had these options before COVID, but consider more gas reimbursements for parents and guardians who they do have a vehicle, and they can safely transport the students. Consider how to provide transportation to distribution sites for meals, supplies, and technology. And if transportation can't be provided for the family to come to the district, you will need to make arrangements to deliver that, even if that means food or school supplies, devices. You have to, figure out a way to get those students equitable services. And this also comes a time where you may need to review policies. If you're looking at your transportation policies and they're creating barriers for these homeless families and unaccompanied homeless youth, you may need to reconsider, some of those policies. Okay, then we're going to talk about some of our, our preschool children, our infants, some of the challenges that they're experiencing during these times. We want to make sure that, of course, they have the appropriate food items, just like our students that are in our elementary schools and high school, to make sure that they also have appropriate food items. Physical safety in motels and shelters and other temporary locations. We need to be aware also of their mental health and development, and make sure that you are communicating with your early childhood centers, your Head Start centers. And when you have families, that are enrolling their children in school, whether it be online or, like I said, sometimes in person, you'll want to ask, are there younger siblings at home? You'll want to ask that to make sure that the needs of those infants and toddlers and preschoolers are also met. And some of those strategies, like I said, ask your families about young children. Find out what your local early childhood center, what programs are they offering, and encourage prioritizing to McKinney-Vento families. Reach out to your early childhood centers, to your Head Starts, and share information about keeping young children safe in motels, shelters, and other homeless situations. I do have some resources available at the end of the presentation that really speaks to a lot of these things that I've talked about in terms of strategies. There's different forms, checklists, and things like that that are very helpful in meeting some of these challenges. And as we all know, our health, our mental health, our basic needs, those are important and really cannot be overlooked. And as much as we're anticipating the numbers of homelessness growing, I believe that the number of cases of health issues, mental health, just our basic needs is going to grow as well. So some of the challenges are access to temporary housing, for self-isolation, recovery, and safety, food access and delivery, access to hygiene and health products and services, and then increased mental health stressors and lack of services. When we talked about access to temporary housing for self-isolation as being a challenge, last spring when shelters were faced with the same situations that all of us were, it really became a big challenge and issue for them. The space, because of social distancing, that meant that they wouldn't be able to accommodate as many families as they were used to doing. And therefore, turning those families away. And here we want to also really engage in your allies in the housing agencies. This comes back, to our community partners. Seek out community partners and help families access those partners. Really be in touch with those agencies that can step up and help our homeless children and youth. Of course, provide hygiene products, maybe during food distribution. Even, I don't know if I mentioned this during the food distribution, if you're to also put in, I think during the identification, is, put in a slip of paper in those food bags that gives contact information to your community partners and to your homeless liaison. Give that information out so that they know who to reach out to when they're faced with these challenges. You can provide additional food for the weekends and provide, even provide virtual mental health services using your school staff or your community partners, your counselor. If you're doing virtual learning for your other academic subjects, your mental health should be considered as well. All right, and I had talked about, the resources here that are really just a wealth of knowledge to help through these challenging times. Schoolhouse Connection has numerous forms and checklists and guidance that speak specifically to our COVID-19 times. Our National Center for Homeless Education, NACE, also has a wealth of information, as well as our DESE site has under communications our COVID-19 information. there's just a wealth of information and knowledge that not only, speaks to our house students, but also our homeless students, because like I said, nothing has changed. Our homeless children and youth should receive the same services that our house students are receiving. We can't just assume that because we're not hearing from them that they're okay. We need to more than ever reach out and find those families and students. All right, I am going to attempt to take some questions. And like I said, I'm going to encourage you to share. I mean, things that are working would be wonderful to hear, and that we can share out to all of our districts. Just like those resources I provided, everything is free for you to use, encouraged for you to use. Why recreate the wheel if we've got something that's working? So I encourage any of those suggestions or techniques that have worked for you. So I'm going to take a minute and kind of look at some of these questions and speak to those. All right. Thank you for waiting. I was looking over the questions here. We do have many, which is great. I did have one that actually came from numerous people, so I thought I would address that one first. The question about a certificate for training. I had mentioned in our listserv that if you are in cohort 1 this year and you had done your kickstand training for the 1920 school year, that certificate of completion would be acceptable for the October cycle of our tiered monitoring. I am actually at this point, because our transition from kickstand to now was a pretty quick turnaround. I'm still working through some of those details. What I'm doing currently is I have a participation list for this webinar today. And for the time being, I am going to use that as verification of participation. I'm hoping that sooner than later I will send a listserv that explains moving forward what that certificate of completion looks like. Okay. Someone just asked, and I guess I would say that too, will we have access to your slides? Yes, the webinar is being recorded and the slides will be posted on the homeless website. Someone asked, how do I get added to the listserv? On the homeless website, there is a link to subscribe to the homeless listserv. Sorry. I actually did have a question. I'll go ahead and address that. The FERPA question about, when one of my strategies were that, do whatever it takes to get in contact with these families, and especially our unaccompanied youth that we may not be able to find. I mentioned, talking to other students. FERPA, that was a good point. I guess what I would maybe suggest is just keep your ears open. Providing information, I guess asking about a student, I don't really believe is kind of against the FERPA guidance, but without getting real specific. But I guess more importantly for our counselors and like I said, that's why it brings us back to that important point about training all of your personnel. That means everyone. So just keep your ears and eyes open so we can locate as many of those families and unaccompanied youth as possible. Is what? Okay. Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm going through these. Okay, this I think is a question that might affect most of you or all of you. So someone asked, what if a homeless family, I just lost the actual language of that, but what if a homeless family does not want to be labeled homeless? And my answer to that is that enrollment form / questionnaire that every district is required to have every family in the district fill out. Like I said, we call it enrollment because we feel like that's probably makes the most sense of the time to ask those residency questions. Is during enrollment time. In a perfect world, I would ask that you would do it again after the holiday break, the new semester in January, because our families' situations change. I see a lot, during the beginning of school and then again at the start of second semester. So that enrollment / questionnaire form is really your foundation. So if a family answers no to every one of those questions, that none of those nighttime residency situations meet their needs or is really what their situation looks like, you really have you don't have any reason to continue with that identification. So a family that is asking, to not be identified as homeless, then your documentation, and again, that you need that documentation to support your reasoning for moving forward with that identification process. So if a family says no, none of these situations explain our nighttime residents, so you wouldn't have the need to continue with that identification. If they answer yes, then you would move forward with that identification process. Okay, I'm having a lot of questions about the certificate of attendance because of the cohort 1 tiered monitoring, which, I say cohort 1, but in reality, whether you are actually uploading documents this year or not, you should be keeping documentation yearly of your ongoing training and all of the required items in our tiered monitoring system and process. So, but of course, the $1 million question is for those who are needing to upload for cohort 1. I will be honest with you, I don't know if you can go back into Kickstand and obtain a certificate of completion. When you completed those courses, you should have had a pop-up at that point that asked you to print your certificate. So, if you didn't do that at the time you completed the course, I would just suggest logging back into Kickstand and seeing if that is an option for you. I can reach out to Kickstand as well and see if I can get some information about that. But, okay, so then there's those that are asking, well, I wasn't the homeless liaison last year, so, I don't have that Kickstand certificate. So on my listserv, what, I asked is that, mentioned that there would be on other trainings available if you weren't able to participate today. If you are, with us today, I will have that list of participants, and I am doing the homeless monitoring for tiered monitoring. I will do all cohort 1, all of the questions for October that pertain to the McKinney-Vento program. So I will have access to that participation list. If there is someone who couldn't attend today and, that's due in 2 days, if you could make a note on that particular item that you would, be attending a upcoming training, then I will look at those individually. Let's see. Someone did mention that you can go back into Kickstand and print the certificate. Thank you so much for that information. Of course, somebody else said you're no longer allowed to log in. So I would try it and see what happens. Up. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm still looking through lots of Kickstand questions. Okay, someone did have a question about on the tiered monitoring checklist for October. Yes, it is a requirement that we reach out to not only our district staff, personnel, but also to our community partners, and so they are aware of what it looks like and what the identification process is when they come in contact with homeless families and youth. There may be a family over the weekend that comes in contact maybe with a faith agency or even in conversation that they may be experiencing homelessness. We need our community partners to know who to contact so that these families get the services they need. Someone said, what is their ideas on how to reach out? It says, I reach out by email, but I did not get a response. It is a required component of our tiered monitoring because it's a really, really important piece. Again, it's part of the process of identifying as many homeless families and unaccompanied homeless youth as we can. So I guess my answer to that would be if your email does not seem to work, then I would pick up the phone and see if you can reach them that way. Okay. Which CIC different one? Okay, there was a question about insurance, insured items. I actually don't see that in front of me, but Teresa was bringing that to my attention. Basically, what do you do for your house students? I mean, you have to remove barriers. Yes, we do. There are some exceptions that we make for our homeless families and unaccompanied homeless youth. But what would you do for your house students if they're not able to return a device? I have had conversations with some districts that say, well, of course, then they would be liable for that. So, that's again a barrier that you would lift. That kind of goes along the same lines as a library book that has fees, but they're not exempt from being responsible either. So, keep that in mind. And I mean, it's just like behavior on a school bus. They're not exempt from being responsible. So I would just keep that in, and that kind of brings us back to policies again. Look at your policies. Put those policies in place that would support the district as well as our homeless families and unaccompanied homeless youth. Okay. Okay, someone had asked about clarification on a school-related expense. We mentioned electricity, helping with those electronic learning devices and learning. Then does that mean electricity could be considered an expense that could support with Title I funds right now? Actually, I suppose that I wouldn't consider, I mean, if a family doesn't have electricity, then really their living situation is not adequate. And they should not, I mean, they should seek out different housing. But that is a good question. I may have to look at that again to see if there's other means to meet that need. So I actually will get back to you specifically, the school district that asked that question. All right. Okay, someone did have a scenario that they have a 17-year-old student who just left his home. His grandma, which is his guardian, is really not happy about the fact that he left. She's curious to know, is he at school? Where is he living? Basically, until a student turns 17, if the grandmother is on the student's enrollment information as, as educational guardian or actual just legal guardian, a student, they can, a parent or someone acting as a parent, according to FERPA, does have right to that information until that student is 18. Okay, I did have a question. Are districts required to reimburse the staff that makes food deliveries for mileage, etc.? I would say, I mean, I'm assuming, but I guess that may not always be the case, is that, of course, they're doing that during the workday. So I'm assuming that you're asking because they're using their own vehicle, because otherwise, you would be using a district vehicle to do that. I would look at this as I would any other reimbursement that you consider for your staff. If it's something that you think qualifies under the policies that you have in place to reimburse your staff for mileage, I would say that that would be a district decision. Okay, someone said, could you please speak more to differentiating homelessness when someone is sharing housing? So, because they're sharing, reasons for sharing, maybe it's just out of choice. It brings us back to that definition of homelessness. And when you're looking at that definition, it asks, we look at whether the situation is fixed, regular, and adequate, but if one of the nighttime resident situation is that you're sharing the housing of another person due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason, I really, I really weigh heavily on that loss of housing. So I think at that point, if you've got a family that does mark that they're sharing the housing of another person, it asks that you explain on the sample enrollment form that we have on our website. You may have to ask more questions. There's oftentimes that families are doubled up because of choice. But that's not always the case. So oftentimes with those situations, you just need to ask more questions. Why are you sharing the housing of another person? Is it due to loss of housing? And like I said, I weigh pretty heavy on that wording and research a little bit more. Okay. So someone asked again, are they homeless if they stay with grandparent majority of the time, but only because parents work crazy hours? Do the parents have a home? Do those students, it didn't sound like they lost housing. It sounds to me like it's more kind of a long-term care for some of those students because the parents work long or crazy hours. They didn't lose housing. It was an arrangement that was made by the parents due to their situation. So I would say no, based on just the question that you asked without doing any further research. Okay, I've got some good information I wanted to share. Local community action agencies throughout Missouri offer a variety of community services such as utility assistance, food, resources for students, and that could mean books, computers, etc. The Boys and Girls Club offer free before and after school care if student goes to school within that district. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great information. Let's see. Someone asked the question, will there be a limited number of students to each cab due to COVID upon returning? I believe that would be the individual cab company's decision, but I would guess yes. That's a challenge, absolutely. That is a big challenge. I don't know that for a fact, but I would believe that would be the decision of the cab company, but I would not be surprised. Okay. Sorry, I had lots of, I apologize. It sounds like some of you were having some issues with hearing properly. Okay, just going through. All right, interesting. I got another question about students that are experiencing targeted community violence and are really needing to flee their home due to that violence and fear of their safety, and they're requesting McKinney-Vento status. Yes, I mean, I would believe that if there's a situation where they need to leave because of, they fear for their safety, again, you would may want to ask more questions, but what I'm thinking, and I have heard situations like this where the only place they can find safe housing would be maybe in another district. But if they can't return home, it really is not adequate. It would really not, it would be similar to having, flooding or fire. It's not a safe place to be. So I would weigh on the side of them qualifying for McKinney-Vento services, just based on the information that you gave me. But I've learned, like I said, in this year, that there's a twist to every situation. Just when you think you understand it, you get a new twist. Okay, someone asked, how does the qualified minor law in Missouri intersect with what you shared about guardians having access to educational information about a 17-year-old student in transition? We do, in the state of Missouri, have a statute that allows our 16 and 17-year-olds to apply for a bank account, sign for a car, Medicaid, some housing, but as far as FERPA and student information, if that grandmother is acting as quote unquote in FAFSA's definition of parent, they are allowed to have educational information. Okay. I'm trying to scroll through here. I'm sorry if you bear with me a little bit. Like I said, a lot of it is just signing in. What one? Okay, if there is a question that I have missed, if you don't mind putting that in the chat box, again, I can bring that to the forefront here and address it. Otherwise, my scrolling is just basically giving me participants. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you for your patience here. I'm just trying to scroll through these. I do have a question that if you have an unaccompanied youth that are transporting themselves, do they qualify for mileage reimbursement? Yes, they do. But it's important that you have a contract or an agreement that's signed by all parties, because if we're talking, especially if they're transporting themselves from another district to their school of origin, the school of residency would also be responsible for a portion of that reimbursement. So it's important that you all understand, and it would be the mileage from home to school and back, and any extracurricular activities that would relate to their attendance and participating fully in school. But I would highly recommend that you have a contract or an agreement in order that is signed by all parties. Someone asked, do we have any training materials or list of indicators to watch for when you're trying to identify homeless youth? We do on our homeless website have some PowerPoints, and I will have this one available as well as just a general McKinney-Vento guidance that is new, that I have presented at a couple of different WebEx meetings that will give you that information, but also the resources that were available in the PowerPoint. NACE, our National Center for Homeless Education, that is contracted through the U.S. Department, has a wonderful homeless liaison toolkit that covers every topic, and very user-friendly. Our homeless non-regulatory guidance is also a very useful tool that I use on a regular basis. You know, I think I will speak a little bit more to the Cohort 1 folks. And again, I say Cohort 1 because I know they're anxious about uploading documentation. But when I say this, I'm really talking to everyone because, like I mentioned earlier, whether you're uploading those documents or not this year, you will be required to do that. And you should be, on a regular basis, having those items readily available at your district. If there was a time that we came on site to see those. So what I always suggest to my homeless liaisons is that just keep electronic folder or even a paper, copy folder that has all those required documents. And so when your cohort year does roll around, you will have those readily available. But for my Cohort 1 group, it is a little different this year. First and foremost, I know in the past when Donna was here, she did not do the homeless McKinney-Vento program tiered monitoring specifically, and as federal program supervisors, we've always had that as part of our tiered monitoring process, but we have chosen to pull that out this year and to have myself do the monitoring, as well as our foster care is going to be the same way, that Sean Cochran will be doing that monitoring. So with that being said, I understand that you're having some challenges with that question about verifying certification. So if you could just put a note in the comment box, we'll work through that. Put a note that you're a new liaison. Again, like I said, if you're here today on this webinar, I will have the participant's name available just as a checklist. So someone had that question. Can you tell us where to find the information that is uploaded when it is our cohort year? Oh, Teresa already posted that. Thank you, Teresa. And that is another suggestion that I make to my new liaisons, and hopefully my veteran liaisons will appreciate this as well. Just use that as your guidance. I used to say that when I was in federal programs. If you have that tiered monitoring list, in either electronically or in your hard copy, if you can check off each one of those and have documentation to support them, you're compliant. you are following the program. So our homeless McKinney-Vento program is no different. So use that as your guide, and you're welcome, to contact me if you have questions. Oh, the other thing that I think is a handy tool when you're looking through those questions, cohort 1 or not, is those questions are from the law. They're required pieces of documentation that need to be provided to support compliance. So those questions are really taken straight from the law or non-regulatory guidance. So the homeless non-regulatory guidance, which is on our homeless website, you can go through that document and match those questions up to the guidance in that document. Someone said they're not sure of what their tiered year is. That is also on our federal programs website that lists all cohorts. And Teresa put that on there too, so that link. Okay, I'm sure I just overlooked, but I feel like, but I just want to reiterate, just so I'm getting a lot of questions about I didn't do kickstand, I'm a new liaison, or I'm not a new liaison, but I didn't do kickstand last year. Will attending this webinar today be valid for training that is required for our tiered monitoring? And the answer is yes. I'll have a list of the participants. I am doing the monitoring this year. If you have other information you'd like for me to know, then you can put that in the notes of your tiered monitoring. I also think it's really important that you are meeting with your federal programs person if that is not you. And make sure that you are providing them the documentation that you need, or of course this year it will be separated, but I know in the past that's been an issue that the federal programs person didn't really know what to upload because they hadn't communicated with their liaison. Thank you, Tammy. It said just started a new Facebook page today. It's titled Missouri Homeless Liaisons. Feel free to join and share info. Thank you. Again, that's Missouri Homeless Liaisons, a Facebook page that Tammy started today. It's very helpful. Thank you. Someone asked, I see the cohort list, but can you share what information we need to keep every year? I really can't. That is also Teresa Vilmer put a link to those checklists. It's it's a lot of information, so it's not something that I can actually relay in this webinar, but there is a link to the tiered monitoring checklist. There's an October, December, February, and April. And if we're just looking at homeless McKinney-Vento program requirements, those questions will be in the October cycle and the February cycle. If you have done cohort or tiered monitoring in the past and you're looping back around, the questions for the McKinney-Vento program in February were not in the tiered monitoring the last time you did them. So those are new. Again, the homeless non-regulatory guidance is a very, very helpful resource to get the documentation that you need and kind of an understanding of what we're looking for there. Okay, I'm just looking through for new questions here. All right, I am still, if there are some questions, if there's something I missed, if you'd like to, add that again, I apologize, but someone did ask if we have access to the February questions for tiered monitoring, and the answer is yes. When you go on that tiered monitoring site, it will give you the questions for each cycle. It does still say 1920, but the questions, while they may be in a different order, they're in the same cycle, and we're in the process of updating that. Again, I'm not noticing any new questions, but if you feel like your question has not been answered, please enter that into the chat box, and I will look at the most recent. Someone asked, is there a way to email me if I cannot find the questions in the chat box? Absolutely. I will have my contact information here on the next slide. Someone asked about the K Kids group. I really would need to get back to you about that. I'm not sure if that still exists, so I would have to look into that. I had a question about kind of revisiting the guidance about the qualified minor law. If a 17-year-old can drop out of school, why can they not choose whom they identify as a contact for educational information? I would like to speak to the group, but I actually would probably feel better if I can get some information that I could send to you that might help with that guidance. Okay, like I said, I don't see any new ones, and I very well could have missed one. So if there's something that you'd like to add to the chat. Okay, I'm going to stay on for a couple more minutes. If there's anything else that anyone wants to share or have questions, otherwise I will, show you my contact information slide and complete the webinar for the day. But I will stay on for a couple more minutes. I think somebody asked about a link that was to the tiered monitoring, whether or not that was the correct spot for homeless info. That would be a link to our tiered monitoring questions, not our homeless website. But if you're at the tiered monitoring website, then you have the option in that same quick links or to choose the homeless website. Okay, I did put my contact information. It will take a few minutes to jot that down if you need to. Like I said, the webinar today will be recorded and the PowerPoint will be posted on our website along with the general McKinney-Vento guidance that is new, that was not recently on the website, but was shared at a couple other different presentations. All right, I just want to thank you all again for participating today. I know that it's been a long time coming and I'm glad that it worked for you, and I know that it wasn't a lot of notice, so I appreciate your time. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have questions, if you just need to talk through some situations. Sometimes when you say them out loud, they seem to fall together a little bit better. So my contact information is here on the slide, and it will be as well on the website. So I appreciate your time today, and take care.